So the last 2 years of my life, half of that was spent on cruise ships. And I want to tell you guys a little bit about that. So I spent a lot of time working on ships, and I get a lot of questions such as, what are ships like? What's it like down below? What kind of food do you eat? Where do you eat? When do you eat? What's the schedule like? So what I wanted to do was answer some questions, because I know there's a lot of questions floating around out there. Maybe you want to do it. Is it right for you? Maybe somebody else wants to do it and you're kind of curious as to what they're jumping into. So like anything else, it has its ups and its downs. So let's talk about some of those downsides first. I'm pretty sure you can imagine what some of those upsides are. So the first thing I want to touch on is this weird mix of corporate and military structure. And here's what I mean by that. You have the corporate side, which is always looking out for revenue and guest interaction, things like that. So they're always looking at the business side of things. And then you have the military side of it. And what I mean by military is maritime sea captain kind of stuff. And you have these ranks. And although you have the corporate side of things looking at the way things should be and how we should interact with guests and how we should conduct ourselves, there's still this very military feeling about the way that a lot of officers will talk to you. So essentially when you're on the ship, it's whatever I say goes. And I've always found that to be a very weird thing, because I've come from corporate backgrounds where you have people from the corporate level who issue authority and it kind of trickles all the way down the chain. Whereas on the ship, on the corporate level, they kind of trickle things down the chain, but then you have the other side who's like, but you're going to do things the way I say because you are on my ship. There's a little bit of a tear going on there, and it's really weird and confusing for the people who are on the ship. I'm hoping I'm making sense there. Now the other thing is you got guests who feel completely entitled to anything and everything. Now don't get me wrong, I understand it's the hospitality business and you got to deal with people, and it's essentially a big floating hotel. But what's different about these types of people is that they're on the ship for like 3, 5, 7, 11 days in a row. And I feel like they get kind of antsy. And they might be okay the first or second night. Sometimes you can tell who the troublemakers are going to be, because literally the first night they're demanding everything in the world. And a lot of them try to get away with a lot of different things. I don't know, like it's just really odd. So maybe I'm just not experienced enough in the hotel industry or hospitality, but they get pretty demanding on the ships. Well, some other things worth noting. You're on a ship, has to come in and leave at a certain time at the ports. So whenever you get to go out, it's really tough to see specific things unless you're on a really planned schedule. Some ports make it really easy to travel and explore, and some ports you kind of have to travel pretty far or pay. So it's not super easy to explore when you're on the ships. Also, once you've been on the ship long enough, it's really easy for it to feel like a floating prison. I mean, several things to consider here is you've got a cabin that's really, really small. It's probably a little bit bigger than my car. And sometimes you got a bunk. Unless you're in a better position, then you might have a room all to yourself, or you may get lucky and you have no roommate. But you're in a small cabin and you don't get to go out every single day. You're not really allowed to hang out in guest areas. I mean, you can, but you got to make sure you're in uniform, and they really discourage it. And sometimes you're stuck on the ship for more than one day in a row. Sometimes they do these crossings where you're crossing over a large body of water, such as a transatlantic crossing. Well, those suck because you can't go anywhere. You're stuck on the ship with everybody else is stuck on the ship. So some people go a little stir crazy. Sometimes you got guests who get a little weird. You got crew that get a little bit weird. And because of this, a lot of people turn to the bar. The ship makes a lot of money off of the crew members spending money at the crew bars. So those are some of the things that are not so pleasant about being on a ship. On the flip side, crew bar is great because it's really cheap and it's open till about 2 in the morning. If you're one of those types of people who socializes pretty well, the ship is going to be a blast for you. If you're not very good at socializing, yeah, it might suck, because if you don't have any friends, you don't really have anybody to talk to. It's a weird experience. It's kind of like going to college in a different country, especially if you're American. There usually aren't a lot of Americans who tend to work on ships because The pay isn't always great, especially for entry-level jobs. Luckily, I'm a musician, so I had a different experience than most. So the bar is great. The socialization, that's great. You get free room and board. You can't really argue with that. Even with a not so great income, you have a place to rest your head in the evening, and you get free food. How does the free food work? There's a crew mess, and if you have the privilege of going upstairs to the buffet where everyone else can eat, you can go there too. Weighing out the pros and cons, I would still say it's a great opportunity for a lot of people, especially if you're from a different country where the American dollar is very strong, because when I was working on the ship, they paid in American dollars. So I would imagine for somebody who's from, for example, the Philippines, where it's almost 50 pesos to a dollar, you know, and maybe they make $700. I can't really do the math in my head right now, but it's a good amount of money for them. Plus, it's consistent. They get to see the world, so on and so forth. But for me, the biggest upside to working on ships is the connections that you make and the places you get to go. Granted, you don't really get to explore the way you would want to if you were actually vacationing, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what you want to see when you go back, if you want to go back. There are some places that I don't think that I would want to go back to. I probably wouldn't go back to Falmouth, Jamaica. I probably wouldn't go back to some parts of Vietnam. So there are plenty of cities that I went to that I just didn't feel like there was a lot going on, and I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me. But there were plenty of other cities that I really loved. I mean, Japan was amazing. The Philippines, when I went to Boracay, that was amazing. I went to Greece. When I went to Athens, that was great. When I went to Santorini, when I went to Mykonos, there's so many cities that I want to go back and actually explore without having to worry about getting back on the ship by a certain time. Otherwise, I'd have to meet with the captain or the staff captain and explain why I was late and get worried about being fired or something like that. And the opportunity to meet friends. I mean, there are so many countries that I can now visit in Europe, go to Canada, go to South America, go to East Asia. It's just so many places that I can go to that I now have a friend over there that if they're there, they wouldn't mind letting me stay at their place. And it's such a good feeling to know that that's something that I've built while maximizing my time on ships. So those are some pros and cons of working on cruise ships. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what cruise ships are like, feel free to leave a comment in the section down below, and I'll probably respond and give you the answer, or if I get enough questions, I'll probably just make a part 2 to this video and answer some more of those questions. Other than that, that's it. That's all I got. Peace.
Baby, I love you. If you want to be, take good care. Hope you make a lot of nice friends out there. Just remember there's a lot of pain.